The morning mist clung to Skull Ridge like a burial shroud when Milton Abernathy first saw what dangled from the ancient oak. Wind chimes made of human jawbones clicked their hollow song against the September dawn, while the metallic stench of old blood, mixed with rotting leaves, painted the air thick enough to taste. This discovery would unravel a family secret that had festered in the Appalachian hollows for over 4 decades, proving that some traditions are too dark to die with their keepers. Milton had been tracking a wounded buck through the ridgeline timber on September 15, 1947, when his hound Duke started whimpering. Not the excited whine of a dog-catching scent, but something deeper, fear, the kind that makes animals remember their prey. Milton pushed through a tangle of mountain laurel and froze. 20 feet above his head, suspended from the lowest branch of a massive white oak, hung a collection that defied explanation. Skulls, dozens of them. Human skulls bleached white by mountain weather, strung together with rusted wire, and swaying in the breeze like grotesque fruit. Some bore neat bullet holes. Others showed the splintered impact of blunt force. A few displayed the telltale scoring of knife work along the orbital bones. Milton's hands shook as he counted. 23 skulls, arranged in descending size from adult to what could only be described as child-sized. Each had been carefully cleaned, the empty sockets facing downward toward the forest floor, as if watching for visitors. The tree itself stood in a small clearing that felt wrong somehow. Too circular, too perfect. The ground beneath was barren of the typical Appalachian undergrowth, marked instead by strange symbols carved into the earth and filled with what looked like bone meal. Duke refused to enter the clearing, backing away with his hackles raised and teeth bared at something Milton couldn't see. That's when Milton noticed the other trees. Oak after oak, each bearing its own collection of death. The entire grove was a monument to murder, hidden in the deep woods where no casual hiker would ever venture. Carved into the largest tree's bark, barely visible beneath decades of growth, were initials: W.W., Keeper of the Covenant. Milton had lived in these mountains his entire 43 years, knew every family name carved into cemetery stones from here to Beckley. But he'd never heard of any covenant, never heard of anyone named W.W. who might claim ownership of this nightmare garden. As he backed away from the clearing, Duke suddenly stopped whimpering and tilted his head toward the ridge above them. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming down the mountain path. Someone was coming to check their collection. What would you do when faced with such an abomination? Run and risk being hunted through familiar woods that suddenly felt foreign, or hide and witness whatever ritual maintenance this bone orchard required? Milton chose to hide, crouching behind a fallen log with Duke pressed against his side. Through the trees, he caught sight of a figure descending toward the clearing. An elderly woman in a faded calico dress, carrying what appeared to be a fresh skull wrapped in burlap. He was about to witness the Ridge family's most sacred tradition. Right after this story, I want to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop that in the comments below. And if you're already feeling that familiar chill creeping up your spine, smash that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to follow this one to the end. The woman's bare feet made no sound on the forest floor as she approached the bone trees, her weathered hands cradling the burlap bundle like a newborn child. Milton could smell wood smoke and something medicinal, pennyroyal, and wild ginseng clinging to her clothes as she entered the clearing with the reverence of someone entering a cathedral. This wasn't random violence or the work of a disturbed individual, but something far more terrifying, a deliberate practice passed down through generations. The woman Milton watched was Wilhelmina Wadsworth, though he wouldn't learn her name for several more hours. She was 71 years old that September morning, the 4th-generation keeper of what her family called the Covenant of Bones. Her great-grandmother had started the collection in 1893, and Wilhelmina had been adding to it since 1908 when she claimed her first skull at the age of 32. She moved through the clearing with practiced efficiency, checking each tree systematically. At the base of every oak, she left small offerings, strips of dried meat, wildflowers, and what appeared to be handwritten notes folded into tiny squares. Milton strained to see the writing, but could only make out dates and what looked like names. The fresh skull she carried bore the distinctive shape of a middle-aged man, recent acquisition, based on the pink staining still visible around the eye sockets. As she unwrapped it, Milton caught sight of gold dental work that glinted in the morning light. Someone with money, someone who would be missed. According to local records that wouldn't surface until 1951, a traveling salesman named Finch Price had disappeared on the mountain road just 3 days earlier. His abandoned Ford had been found near Copper Creek, with the engine still running and his sample case untouched on the passenger seat. Sheriff's reports listed it as probable desertion, another man who'd simply walked away from his responsibilities. The Ridge family had been collecting more than skulls. Wilhelmina began a low humming as she worked, something that sounded like a hymn but with words Milton couldn't quite catch. She selected a spot on the eastern oak, approximately 8 feet from the ground, and began the careful process of securing her newest addition to the collection. What struck Milton most wasn't the macabre nature of what he was witnessing, but the tenderness with which she handled each skull. She cleaned Price's remains with a soft cloth, arranged it at precisely the right angle, and whispered something that sounded like an apology before stepping back to admire her work. This wasn't the behavior of a madwoman. This was ritual. This was worship. The humming stopped abruptly. Wilhelmina's head snapped toward Milton's hiding spot with the sudden alertness of a predator sensing movement. Her eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter ice, seemed to look directly through the fallen log where he crouched with Duke. "I know you're there, Milton Abernathy," she called softly, her voice carrying the mountain accent thick as honey. "Been watching you track that buck since dawn. Come out now, and we'll have ourselves a conversation." Milton's blood turned to ice water. She knew his name, had been watching him while he thought he was hunting. The hunter had become the hunted, without ever realizing the game had changed. Duke whimpered and pressed closer against Milton's leg, every instinct screaming danger. But there was nowhere to run. The ridge behind them was steep and rocky, impossible to navigate quickly. The only path down led directly past Wilhelmina's position. "Don't make me come fetch you," she continued, her tone remaining conversational, but carrying an undertone of steel. "We got things to discuss, you and me, about what you've seen, about what you're going to do with that knowledge. Some secrets demand blood payment." Milton realized he had only 2 choices: reveal himself and hope for mercy, or try to run and likely join Finch Price's skull on one of those terrible trees. But as he struggled with his decision, another figure emerged from the tree line behind Wilhelmina, a younger woman, perhaps 40, carrying a rifle and wearing the confident smile of someone who'd been hunting men far longer than deer. The Ridge family's bone orchard had more than one tender. The younger woman's boots crunched through dead leaves as she flanked Milton's position. Her Winchester .30-30 held with the casual competence of someone who'd never missed what she aimed at. The acrid smell of gun oil mixed with the pine sap bleeding from wounded bark, while morning dew made everything slick enough to betray any sudden movement. Milton was about to learn that the Ridge family's tradition hadn't skipped a generation, and that some apprenticeships begin with watching your teacher work. The woman circling behind him was Sophronia Wadsworth, Wilhelmina's daughter-in-law, and the designated heir to the bonekeeper's role. At 39, she'd already contributed 7 skulls to the family collection, including her own husband when he'd threatened to expose their work to the county sheriff back in 1943. "Come on out, Milton," Sophronia called, her voice carrying the same deceptive sweetness as her mother-in-law's. "Duke's getting himself all worked up for nothing. We ain't gonna hurt you. Not unless you make us." Milton rose slowly from behind the log, hands visible and empty. Duke stayed pressed against his leg, trembling but loyal. The clearing felt smaller now, with 3 people in it. The skull trees seeming to lean inward like curious spectators. Wilhelmina smiled, revealing teeth stained brown from years of tobacco and mountain coffee. That's better. Now, you got yourself quite an eyeful this morning, didn't you? Most folks who stumble onto our grove don't get the chance to appreciate the craftsmanship. According to a journal later recovered from the Wadsworth property, the family had perfected their hunting techniques through 4 decades of practice. They'd learned to identify isolated travelers, people whose disappearances wouldn't trigger intensive searches. Salesmen like Finch Price, drifters looking for work, government surveyors, mapping the mountain timber rights. You're probably wondering about the why of it all, Sophronia said, positioning herself where she could see both Milton and the path he'd used to enter the clearing. Most people do. They see the bones and think we're just killing for sport. But this isn't sport, Wilhelmina continued, gesturing toward the skull trees with obvious pride. This is preservation. Every soul we harvest feeds the mountain, keeps the old ways alive. Our great-grandmother started this covenant when the coal companies first tried to strip these ridges bare. The logic, twisted as it was, had a certain mountain mysticism to it. The Ridge family believed they were guardians of something ancient, protectors of a land that needed blood sacrifice to maintain its power. Milton found his voice. Those are people you killed. Families somewhere are looking for them. People who had no business on our mountain, Sophronia replied matter-of-factly. People who came here to take something that wasn't theirs. The land decides who stays and who feeds the trees. What chilled Milton most wasn't their casual attitude toward murder, but their absolute conviction that they were performing a sacred duty. They weren't insane. They were true believers in a religion written in bone and enforced with blood. Duke suddenly growled low in his throat, not at the women, but at something behind them. All 3 humans turned to see a third figure emerging from the tree line, an elderly man in overalls, carrying a leather satchel that clinked with metal tools. "Afternoon, grandfather," Sophronia said with genuine warmth. "We got ourselves a visitor." The old man studied Milton with eyes that had seen too much death to register surprise at finding another witness to their work. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd been making life and death decisions longer than Milton had been alive. "Well now," he said, setting down his satchel with deliberate care, "I reckon we got ourselves a choice to make. Blood always calls for blood." Milton realized the satchel contained the tools for preparing skulls, and that he was about to discover whether the Ridge family's covenant required him to join their collection, or if there was another fate reserved for those who stumbled onto their secret. The old man reached into his satchel and withdrew something that glinted in the morning light. The old man's weathered fingers closed around a worn leather journal, its pages yellow with age and stained with substances Milton didn't want to identify. The metallic tang of old blood seemed to intensify as he opened it, while the forest around them fell silent, except for the wind moving through the skull trees like whispered prayers. Milton was about to learn that the Ridge family kept meticulous records of their kills, and that his fate might already be written in those pages. The patriarch was Luther Winslow, Wilhelmina's father, and the undisputed head of the Ridge family covenant. At 86, he'd been harvesting skulls since 1879, when his own father had initiated him into the tradition at the age of 14. His journal contained the names, dates, and locations of over 200 victims spanning nearly 70 years. "Let's see here," Luther muttered, licking his thumb to turn the brittle pages. "Milton Abernathy, born 1904. Lives in the hollow below Copper Creek with his wife Tabitha and their boy Solomon. Works timber for the Morrison Company." Milton's knees nearly buckled. They knew everything about him, his family, his work. How long had they been watching? "Says here you've been hunting these ridges since you were 12 years old," Luther continued, reading from notes written in spidery handwriting. Know every deer path and water source from here to Black Mountain. Served in France during the war. Purple Heart and Bronze Star. According to military records that wouldn't be declassified until 1973, Milton Abernathy had killed 17 German soldiers during the Battle of Belleau Wood. He'd returned home in 1919 with skills the Ridge family had been observing with interest ever since. A man who can kill when necessary, Wilhelmina observed approvingly. A man who understands that sometimes death serves a higher purpose. Sophronia shifted her rifle to a more comfortable position. Question is, does he understand our purpose? Luther closed the journal and studied Milton with the intensity of a man evaluating livestock. Your boy Solomon's got himself a scholarship to the university down in Morgantown, don't he? Smart child, good with numbers, wants to be an engineer. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Cooperate, or Solomon's dreams died with him. What do you want from me? Milton asked, his voice hoarse with fear and rage. Same thing we want from everyone who finds their way up here, Luther replied. A choice. You can walk away and pretend you never saw our trees. Keep your mouth shut, go about your business, live your life, but you become part of the covenant. You help us when we need help. The alternative hung unspoken in the air between them. Some bargains are written in bone. Milton understood with perfect clarity that he was being recruited, not threatened. The Ridge family had been studying him for years, waiting for the right moment to make their approach. His military record, his knowledge of the mountains, his isolated lifestyle, everything made him a perfect addition to their operation. We don't just kill random folks, Sophronia explained, as if reading his thoughts. We're selective, careful. Every skull in these trees belonged to someone who threatened our mountain. Coal company surveyors, government agents, people who came here to change things that shouldn't be changed. And now, you want me to help you murder them, Milton said. We want you to help us protect what's ours, Wilhelmina corrected. Same as you protected your country in France. Same as you protect your family every day. Luther reached into his satchel again, this time withdrawing a small bone flute carved from what appeared to be a human femur. When he played it, the sound was haunting and beautiful, like nothing Milton had ever heard. This belonged to the first keeper, Luther said when the melody ended. My great-grandmother carved it from the thigh bone of a railroad surveyor who tried to bring the Baltimore and Ohio through our hollow in 1876. Music helps the spirits rest easier. Milton looked up at the skull trees, imagining the lives they'd contained. Traveling salesmen with families waiting at home. Government workers just trying to do their jobs. How many children had grown up wondering why their fathers never came home? But then he thought of Solomon, brilliant and eager, counting down the days until he could leave for college. Thought of Tabitha, who still kissed him goodbye every morning, like they were newlyweds. How long do I have to decide? He asked. Luther smiled, revealing gaps where teeth had been lost to time and violence. Well now, that depends on what you saw this morning. Did you see 3 old mountain folks tending to their family cemetery? Or did you see something that might require you to talk to the sheriff? The bone flute sang again in the morning wind, its hollow voice carrying across the ridge like a funeral dirge. Milton realized his answer would determine whether he walked down the mountain as a free man or joined Finch Price in the family collection. Milton's decision hung in the morning air like smoke from a funeral pyre, while Duke's nervous panting mixed with the distant call of crows gathering in the bone trees above. The metallic taste of fear coated his tongue as he stared into Luther's ancient eyes and saw decades of justified murder reflected back. This moment would determine whether Milton Abernathy became another skull in the collection or the newest guardian of the Ridge family's terrible covenant. I got conditions, Milton said finally, his voice steadier than he felt. I won't hurt innocent people, and my family stays out of this completely. Luther's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. Son, We don't hurt innocent people. That's the whole point. Every skull up there belonged to someone who came to steal, destroy, or change what wasn't theirs to touch. Wilhelmina nodded approvingly. Show him the book, grandfather. Let him see who we've been protecting this mountain from. Luther withdrew a second journal, this one bound in what looked suspiciously like human skin. The pages chronicled a shadow war spanning 7 decades. Coal company executives who'd tried to buy Ridge family land through intimidation. Federal agents surveying for a proposed highway that would have destroyed their hollow. Corporate lawyers arriving with bogus mineral rights claims. According to records later discovered in a hidden cave on the property, the Ridge family had prevented at least 12 major development projects through strategic elimination of key personnel. Their covenant wasn't random violence, it was environmental terrorism disguised as mountain justice. Finch Price wasn't selling brushes, Sophronia explained, gesturing toward his fresh skull hanging from the eastern oak. He was scouting for a limestone quarry, had maps of our water table in his sample case, plans to dynamite the ridge where our great-great-grandmother's buried. Milton studied the skull with new understanding. The gold dental work belonged to a man who could afford the best medical care, a man with connections and backing, someone whose disappearance would eventually trigger investigations. How do you keep the law from asking questions? He asked. Same way mountain folks always have, Luther replied. Sheriff's office gets a generous donation every Christmas. County coroner's wife buys her medicine from Wilhelmina's herb garden. Everybody who matters knows we keep the peace up here, even if they don't ask about our methods. The corruption ran deeper than individual bribes. According to state police files that wouldn't surface until 1961, Mercer County had reported the lowest crime rate in West Virginia for 37 consecutive years. No one questioned the statistics because the results spoke for themselves. Death keeps perfect order, but Milton sensed something else in their explanations, a defensiveness that suggested their covenant faced new challenges. Who else knows about the trees? Wilhelmina and Sophronia exchanged glances. Luther's expression darkened. That's the problem, he said slowly. Word's getting out. Government's been sending different kinds of people lately. Folks who know how to stay hidden, how to watch without being seen. Professional types. A chill ran down Milton's spine. Federal agents? Worse, Sophronia said. Military intelligence. Someone leaked about our wartime contributions. During World War II, according to classified OSS documents, the Ridge family had eliminated 3 suspected German saboteurs who'd parachuted into the Appalachian wilderness. They delivered the bodies to the nearest army base wrapped in burlap with a note that read simply, Mountain Justice. No questions asked. That patriotic service had brought them to the attention of people who appreciated their unique skills. They want to recruit us, Luther explained. Turn our covenant into government work. Send us after Russian spies and communist organizers instead of coal company men. Milton understood the implications immediately. And if you refuse, then we become the targets, Wilhelmina said grimly. They can't let people like us operate independently. Too dangerous to their control. The bone trees creaked in a sudden gust of wind, their grisly ornaments clicking together like wind chimes made of nightmares. Milton realized he wasn't just being recruited into a family murder cult. He was being drafted into a war between old mountain justice and new federal authority. How long before they move against you? He asked. Luther consulted his pocket watch, a gold timepiece stained with rust that might have been blood. 3 weeks, maybe 4. They're gathering intelligence, building a case. When they come, it'll be fast and final. Milton looked up at the skull trees one more time, counting the faces of justice served mountain style. Soon those bones might be evidence in a federal courtroom, or more likely, the whole grove would simply burn with everyone who knew its secrets. But as he prepared to give Luther his final answer, Duke suddenly bolted toward the tree line, barking frantically at something hidden in the undergrowth. something that had been watching them throughout their entire conversation. Duke's barking shattered the morning quiet as he charged toward a dense thicket of mountain laurel. His hackles raised and teeth bared at something that had been observing their conversation from the shadows. The sharp crack of breaking branches mixed with the metallic click of a rifle bolt, while the acrid smell of fear sweat suddenly tainted the air. Milton was about to discover that the Ridge family's enemies had been closer than anyone imagined, and that their mountain stronghold was no longer the sanctuary it had been for 7 decades. A figure emerged from the undergrowth with hands raised, moving slowly, but without the panic of someone caught by surprise. The man was young, maybe 30, dressed in civilian clothes that were too clean for serious mountain hiking. His boots were government issue. His haircut was military precise, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone trained to kill professionally. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced calmly, reaching slowly for what Milton assumed was identification. "Agent Virgil Kensington. I'd appreciate it if everyone kept their weapons lowered while we have ourselves a conversation." Luther's ancient face split into a grin that revealed too many missing teeth. "Well, I'll be damned. They sent a baby to catch wolves." Kensington's gaze swept the clearing, taking in the skull trees with the detached professionalism of someone cataloging evidence. He showed no shock, no revulsion, just the focused attention of a predator evaluating his prey. "I've been documenting your operation for 6 months," he said, pulling a small camera from his jacket pocket. 47 photographs, audio recordings of 3 separate conversations, detailed maps of your entire property, including the cave system, where you store the bodies before processing. According to FBI files later declassified under the Freedom of Information Act, Operation Boneyard had been tracking the Ridge family since 1946. They'd identified the family as potential assets for off-the-books eliminations, but had discovered something far more valuable than simple assassins. The Ridge family had created a perfect disposal system. "The Bureau has a proposition," Kensington continued, apparently unconcerned that he was surrounded by 3 armed killers in the middle of nowhere. "Your covenant continues, but under federal oversight. Same mission, expanded scope. We provide targets, you provide results." Sophronia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What makes you think we'd work for the government that's been trying to destroy our mountain for 50 years? Because the alternative is 25 to life in federal prison?" Kensington replied matter-of-factly, "We have enough evidence to convict all 3 of you for conspiracy to commit murder. Multiple counts, death penalty cases." Milton realized he was witnessing a recruitment pitch delivered at gunpoint. The federal government didn't want to destroy the Ridge family's operation, they wanted to control it. Some partnerships are forged in blood. Luther studied the young agent with the intensity of a snake evaluating a mouse. "And what about our friend Milton here? He gets swept up in your net too?" "Mr. Abernathy is perfect for our needs," Kensington said, consulting a small notebook. "Combat experience, local knowledge, no close ties to law enforcement. He'll be our liaison between your family and Bureau operations." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. The government had orchestrated Milton's discovery of the skull trees, knowing the Ridge family would try to recruit him. Now they had leverage over everyone involved. "How do we know you came alone?" Wilhelmina asked, her voice carrying the suspicion of someone who'd survived by trusting no one. Kensington smiled for the first time, and Milton felt his blood turn cold. "You don't. In fact, you should assume I didn't." The forest around them suddenly felt different. Every shadow could hide a sniper. Every rustling branch might conceal backup agents. The Ridge family's mountain fortress had become a killing ground with them at the center. 30 seconds to decide, Kensington said, checking his watch. Federal partnership or federal prison. Either way, the bone collecting ends today. Luther's hand moved toward his satchel, but froze when red laser dots appeared on his chest. Professional marksmen had them all in their sights. Milton understood with perfect clarity that no one was walking away from this clearing unchanged. The covenant that had protected these mountains for 70 years was about to be transformed into something far more dangerous. But as Kensington waited for their answer, a new sound echoed across the ridge. The deep, resonant call of a hunting horn, blown from somewhere higher up the mountain. The Ridge family wasn't the only mountain clan that knew how to kill, and the federal government had just walked into a war they didn't understand. The hunting horn's call echoed through the hollow like a death knell, its deep brass voice carrying the ancient authority of mountain law older than any government badge. The sound of boots moving through underbrush came from multiple directions now, while the sharp smell of black powder and gun oil announced that federal agents weren't the only ones who'd come armed to this gathering. Milton was about to witness a clash between two kinds of justice, federal authority, and mountain tradition that would leave the ridge stained with more than just morning dew. Agent Kensington's confident demeanor cracked for the first time as he recognized the tactical disadvantage of his position. The red laser dots that had appeared on Luther's chest suddenly multiplied, but they weren't all pointing at the Ridge family anymore. Some were trained on the federal agents hidden in the surrounding woods. That would be the Barton clan, Luther said with obvious satisfaction. Neighbors of ours. They take a dim view of government interference in mountain business. Imogen Barton emerged from the tree line like a force of nature, her weathered face bearing the stern authority of someone who'd been settling disputes with gunpowder since before Kensington was born. At 63, she commanded a network of cousins, in-laws, and blood relatives that stretched across 4 counties. Her great-grandfather had fought Union soldiers during the Civil War. Her father had killed revenuers during Prohibition. She'd inherited a legacy of resistance to outside authority. "Morning, Luther," she called, her rifle held casually but ready. "Heard you had some uninvited guests causing trouble." Behind her came 6 more figures, all armed, all moving with the fluid coordination of people who'd hunted together since childhood. They spread out in a loose circle, effectively surrounding the federal agents who thought they'd had the Ridge family trapped. According to DEA reports filed in 1952, the Barton clan controlled moonshine distribution throughout central Appalachia. They'd eliminated 17 federal agents over 30 years, always making the deaths look like hunting accidents or disappearances in the treacherous mountain terrain. "Mrs. Barton," Kensington said, trying to regain control of the situation, "this is federal business. I strongly advise you to withdraw your people before this escalates." Imogen's laugh was like gravel sliding down a mountain. "Boy, you're standing on land that's been in these families since before your government existed. We don't withdraw from our own dirt." The tactical situation had shifted completely. What began as a federal recruitment operation had become a siege, with government agents caught between 2 mountain clans who viewed outside interference as an act of war. Milton realized the hunting horn hadn't been a signal for help. It had been a declaration of war. Some traditions are worth dying for. "How many agents did you bring?" Imogen asked Kensington conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Enough," he replied, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Well, let's see then," she said, raising 2 fingers to her lips and producing a whistle that carried across the ridge like a bird call. The response came immediately. Muzzle flashes erupted from hidden positions throughout the forest as the Barton clan engaged federal snipers who thought they were invisible. The sharp crack of rifle fire echoed through the mountains, punctuated by the deeper boom of shotguns and the angry buzz of bullets snapping through branches. Milton threw himself behind the fallen log where he'd originally hidden, dragging Duke with him. The skull trees above them began to shatter as stray rounds found their targets, sending bone fragments raining down like macabre snow. Luther had vanished into the undergrowth with the fluid grace of someone half his age. Wilhelmina and Sophronia moved in opposite directions, using the chaos to flank whatever federal positions they could identify. Kensington spoke rapidly into a radio, calling for backup that might not arrive in time to matter. The federal government's carefully planned operation was disintegrating into a mountain war that would leave survivors but no winners. "This is Agent Kensington," he shouted over the gunfire. "Ceasefire. We can negotiate." Imogen's voice carried clearly through the battle noise. "Mountain justice don't negotiate with invaders, boy. Never has. Never will." A scream from somewhere in the woods indicated that at least one federal agent had discovered why the Ridge family's skull collection was about to gain new additions. But as Milton hugged the earth and listened to the battle rage around him, he heard something that made his blood freeze. Multiple vehicles were coming up the mountain road, engines straining against the grade. The federal government had brought more than just a few agents to this confrontation. The convoy of black government vehicles climbed the mountain road like mechanical vultures, their engines screaming against the grade, while diesel exhaust mixed with gun smoke to create a choking fog that settled over the ridge like a funeral shroud. The metallic taste of cordite hung in the air as automatic weapons fire replaced the precision shots of hunting rifles, transforming the ancient bone grove into a modern battlefield. Milton was witnessing the moment when mountain justice collided with federal power, and both sides had brought enough firepower to turn Skull Ridge into a graveyard. The reinforcements weren't just more FBI agents. According to classified Army records that wouldn't surface until 1994, the federal response included a full platoon of military intelligence operatives armed with experimental weapons and authorization to use lethal force without restraint. The government had decided that the Ridge family's knowledge was too dangerous to leave uncontrolled. 3 armored vehicles crested the ridge, their mounted machine guns swiveling toward the tree line where muzzle flashes marked Barton clan positions. Behind them came 2 troop transports and what appeared to be a mobile command unit bristling with radio antennas. "Sweet Jesus," Milton whispered, watching the military convoy deploy with mechanical precision. "They're not here to arrest anybody." The government had come to erase the Ridge family completely. Imogen Barton's tactical brilliance became apparent as the federal forces advanced. Her people had prepared for this possibility, mining the road with improvised explosives salvaged from abandoned coal operations. The lead armored car disappeared in a thunderous blast that sent twisted metal spinning through the morning air like deadly confetti. But the military response was immediate and overwhelming. Helicopter gunships appeared over the eastern ridge, their rotors beating the air like mechanical angels of death. Rockets streaked into the forest, turning 100-year-old oaks into burning splinters and sending shock waves that knocked Milton flat against the forest floor. Luther Winslow emerged from the smoke like a vision from the Old Testament, his ancient body moving with surprising speed as he carried what appeared to be a military radio torn from a dead federal agent. His voice boomed across the battlefield, with the authority of a mountain patriarch calling his people to arms. "This is our land," he shouted. "Our bones, our covenant. No government's taking what we've protected for 70 years. The skull trees burned around him, their grisly ornaments consumed by flames that seemed to dance with unnatural colors. Decades of carefully preserved trophies were being reduced to ash, but Luther showed no concern for the destruction of his family's collection. He had something more important to protect. Solomon's blood runs mountain deep. Wilhelmina appeared beside him, her calico dress singed, but her eyes blazing with religious fervor. In her hands she carried the leather journal that contained 70 years of names, dates, and locations. The complete record of the Ridge family's covenant was about to become evidence in a federal investigation, unless she could prevent it. "Burn it all," she commanded, her voice carrying over the battle noise. "Nothing survives for them to use." Sophronia and 3 Barton clan fighters formed a protective circle around the burning grove, laying down covering fire while Wilhelmina fed pages from the journal into the flames. Names, dates, and detailed accounts of ritual murders were being consumed by fire that seemed hungry for their secrets. But Agent Kensington had survived the initial assault, and he was desperately radioing coordinates to the helicopter gunship circling overhead. The federal government might not capture the Ridge family alive, but they could still recover enough evidence from the ashes to justify their actions. Milton realized that everyone in the clearing was about to die, either from federal gunfire or in the inferno that was consuming the bone grove. The covenant that had protected these mountains for 7 decades was ending in blood and flame. Then he heard something that made his soul freeze: the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery shells. The military had called in heavy weapons to finish what the ground assault had started. The entire ridge was about to be erased from the map, along with everyone who knew its secrets. Even today, locals in Mercer County speak in whispers about the unexplained explosions that shook the mountains in September of 1947, and some swear they still hear bone wind chimes singing in the hollows when the moon is dark. The artillery shells scream down from a cloudless sky, like the judgment of an angry god. Their whistling descent, mixing with the final prayers of men who'd chosen to die on their own ground rather than surrender to federal authority. The earth trembled as explosions walked across Skull Ridge in a pattern designed to leave nothing but smoking craters where the bone grove had stood for 70 years. Milton was about to witness the complete destruction of a mountain tradition that had survived the Civil War, Prohibition, and 2 world wars, only to be erased by a government that feared what it couldn't control. The first shell struck the eastern oak where Finch Price's skull had hung that morning, vaporizing bone and bark in a flash of white heat that left afterimages burned into Milton's retinas. The second and third shells followed in rapid succession, systematically destroying every tree in the grove, while the surviving members of both mountain clans dove for whatever cover they could find. Luther Winslow refused to take shelter. The 86-year-old patriarch stood in the center of the burning clearing, his arms raised toward the sky in defiance or benediction. When the fourth shell exploded less than 30 feet from his position, the blast wave lifted him off his feet and hurled him against the base of the last remaining skull tree. Milton crawled toward the old man, expecting to find a corpse. Instead, Luther's eyes were still sharp and focused, though blood leaked from his ears and his breathing came in shallow gasps. "The journal," Luther whispered, pressing something into Milton's hands. "Hidden copy. Cave system. Keep the covenant alive." It was a smaller leather book, identical to the one Wilhelmina had burned. The complete record of 70 years of mountain justice, preserved for whoever survived to carry on the tradition. According to county records that wouldn't surface until 1987, the federal bombardment lasted exactly 17 minutes and consumed 43 artillery shells. Official reports listed the incident as a training exercise gone wrong, with no mention of the Ridge family or their bone collection. The blood debt never ends. When the shells finally stopped falling, an unnatural silence settled over the ridge. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as smoke rose from the devastated landscape like incense from a violated altar. Milton found himself alone among the dead. Luther's body lay twisted against the shattered remains of the last skull tree, his ancient eyes still open and staring at the sky. Wilhelmina and Sophronia were nowhere to be seen, vanished into the cave system they'd mentioned or claimed by the artillery barrage. Agent Kensington emerged from behind an overturned vehicle, his suit torn and his face blackened with soot. He carried a military radio and wore the expression of someone who'd witnessed something beyond his understanding. "It's over," he said, though his voice carried no conviction. "The operation is concluded." But Milton knew better. He could feel Luther's journal burning against his chest, where he'd hidden it inside his jacket. The Ridge family's covenant wasn't ending, it was evolving. The federal government had destroyed the bone grove, but they'd also created something far more dangerous: a survivor with nothing left to lose and a sacred duty to fulfill. Milton walked down the mountain alone, leaving Duke's body beside his fallen master, and carrying secrets that would reshape his understanding of justice, loyalty, and the price of protecting what you love. 3 weeks later, Agent Kensington's body was found in his Washington hotel room, apparently the victim of a heart attack. The autopsy revealed traces of a rare mountain plant toxin that mimicked cardiac arrest. The case was closed without investigation. Within 6 months, every federal agent involved in Operation Boneyard had died under suspicious circumstances. Car accidents on mountain roads, hunting accidents in remote forests, heart attacks that struck healthy young men without warning. The Ridge family's covenant continued, but now it operated in the shadows of government agencies and federal bureaucracies. Milton Abernathy had become something the mountain clans had never produced before, an urban predator who understood both worlds and could move between them like smoke. The skull trees were gone, but the harvest continued in office buildings and government parking garages where no one thought to look for mountain justice. Even today, federal agents working cases in Appalachian regions report equipment failures, communication blackouts, and the unsettling sensation of being watched by eyes that remember older laws than anything written in Washington courtrooms. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.